Well, hello and welcome to our next video entitled Creating Font Stacks with Adobe Edge Web Fonts in Dreamweaver CC 2017. And that's quite a mouthful, so let's break it down. This video is going to help us understand the role of web fonts, and then on top of that, the role of these Adobe Edge web fonts using Dreamweaver. So to begin, we have to understand that this represents a solution to a long-term problem for web developers and web designers trying to control the look of their fonts, their text on the web page, and trying to match the look of those fonts to the particular theme and style of the website they're building. And the problem traditionally has been that as a user takes a look at your website in their own browser on their own device, they can only see web fonts that they actually have installed on their own computers, which as a designer we can't control, of course. So we might pick a web font that we think looks great, but maybe very few people actually have it installed on their computers and therefore cannot really end up seeing it the way we intended. So the solution here is that nowadays with so much bandwidth, people can download the fonts on the fly as needed so that they will always have the font that we want to be displayed on our website. So much more control for us, the designer, with this web font type solution. And then there's the problem of where do the web fonts come from, and do we have the rights to be downloading them and displaying them? And that's where Adobe Web Fonts comes in and kind of solves all of those problems and makes it a simple solution for us. What we're looking at here is the actual dialog box that we'll be using later from within Dreamweaver to choose the particular fonts that we want to use on our page. So let's get to see what it is that we'll be working with in this particular website. So we're going to work with a very simple resume page, a one-page website consisting of an online resume. And this is the initial starting point for us. And in this case, if we're just focusing on the fonts here, we'll probably see three distinct areas. There's the page heading, there's these headings along the side of the resume, and then there's the detail areas on the right-hand column. And in this initial situation, we're not trying to control the fonts at all, so we're just getting default, what's probably Times New Roman on this computer that we're working with. Maybe it's the same on yours, maybe something different, but the point is it's all one font, and it doesn't work real well because there's not much contrast, and that type of font with these decorative edges generally doesn't work real well in areas where there's a lot of text. So what we want to do is take control of these fonts and have something much more distinct for our headings, something decorative and professional looking, and then we want something that's more readable in the main text areas for the details. And this is what we're going to hopefully end up with. And you can see that we've accomplished some of those goals as these fonts are distinctly different from one another. There's a bit of a contrast in the way they look. They're distinctive and professional at the same time. And you can see if you look more closely at the detailed text in the right-hand column that we no longer have the decorative edges on the font, so that's what helps to make it more readable. And obviously a very thick, strong-looking main heading to introduce your resume. And so those are the goals. We're going to be changing the three different font areas: the heading 1s, the heading 2s, and the main body text. Alright, so where are we getting these files from? Let's go to take a look at that. So we open up our DW Resume Fonts folder and we see two files, the resume web page and the styles cascading style sheet or CSS file, which is giving us some of the basic styles like the background color and some of the margins and things of that nature. So let's open up Dreamweaver, define our site to be this folder, and then we can start working with those Adobe Edge web fonts that we were talking about so gloriously before. So let's go and launch Dreamweaver, and I'll be using the 2017 release of Dreamweaver for this project. We'll begin by going Site, New Site, and I'll name my site DW Resume Fonts, and I'll browse to the location of my particular folder, which happens to be on the desktop, DW Resume Fonts. Select that folder, and although we normally also in these videos would go to advanced settings and set a default images folder, we actually have no images at all in this site, so no need to do that this time. As a result, we have a files panel now, which shows the two files we saw earlier. Let's open the resume file. It's opening up in code view for me. I'm going to change that to live view, and we see something pretty similar to what we saw in the browser a few moments ago. Now, the goal was to build those specific fonts that we saw in the second web page, and to do that I have some fonts in mind that we were going to be using. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the Tools menu, which, by the way, if you're using the 2015 release, you'd be using the Modify menu instead of the Tools menu. Dreamweaver did a little bit of change of some of the menu structures from 2015 to 2017, and in either case we're looking for the Manage Fonts choice there, and when we do, we see that very same dialog box that we were looking at on the initial screen for this video. So what this is that we're looking at here is a list of all of the available fonts that we can choose from to apply to our text on our pages. So initially what I'm going to look for is a font that will work well for the main body text. That is something readable, something that's not decorative, and something that in this case looks somewhat professional. So what I've decided to go with here, and you can use some of these settings along the left to help you filter out the fonts to find what you're looking for. So in our case with the body, I'd be looking for a sans serif or non-decorative font, and we can probably find that from this list of sans fonts. By clicking on that, it limits the fonts down to the non-decorative ones primarily. So we're looking here for one called Source Sans Pro, and it is alphabetical, so we should be able to browse down and find it. And here it is, Source Sans Pro. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward and easy to work with and read. So I'm going to choose that one. Also, there's one called PT Sans Narrow. That will be an alternative for us. Here it is. And the point of that one is it looks pretty similar to the original one I chose. And just in case there's a problem with one, I'll have this as a backup. Alright, now that takes care of the body text. Now I want to search for a couple of fonts that I'll use for this main heading. And in that case, I've got a few in mind that are much more thick and much more decorative, because there's going to be very little of that text, and it's going to be very large and easy to read no matter how decorative it might look. So I can kind of have more liberty to find something that suits my particular stylistic interest. And to find one of those, I'm going to go for the more decorative area here. This is a list of serif fonts. A serif is the decorative edge that you're seeing on all of these fonts. I'm going to choose this first one. It's called Abril Fat Face. I believe that face means font face, not human face. And then we will also go with a backup for that one, and in this case it's called Kata 1. So again, we're going to scroll down and see if we can alphabetically find it. It starts with K. And eventually here I find it, Kata 1. Again, something that has a somewhat similar look to the original one as a backup. So I've got Aberral Fat Face and Kata 1 chosen for the main heading. And lastly, I'm going to look for some fonts that would work for this set of headings along the left-hand side, which in HTML are all H2s, by the way. So for those, Kata 1 would also work well. And I have one other one called Lancelot in mind, and it's right next to it, so that's easy enough. And at that point, we have chosen all of the fonts that we intend to use. So we're going to click Done. And nothing really happens if you were expecting our page to somehow magically change. It's not going to happen yet. What we've done there is just basically made Dreamweaver aware that we want to use those fonts later. So next, what we're going to do is build those particular font stacks and apply them to the areas that we want to. So first, we'll work with the body. I'm going to click here in live view on something in the body, like a paragraph. I really want to just focus on the body itself, so I'm clicking body here in the tag selector. And I want to also bring in the CSS designer, because that's really where we're going to be doing most of our work here. And keep in mind that we do have an existing style sheet called styles.css, and I want to click on that and then click on global and then work my way down to selectors. And you can see here that I already have some selectors in place. For example, the body selector is used currently to set some basic properties such as the background color. And I also have H2s already selected for some other styling, so those will be easy to reuse later when we want to put those fonts on them. First, we're going to click on body, as I mentioned, and then on the right hand side we can begin to work with our fonts. So I'm going to click on the text area. And font family is really the property that we're going to be working with for each of these areas. So I'm going to click on that, and it opens up and shows me some of the font stacks that have already been set up by default in Dreamweaver. And remember what a font stack is from earlier use. It's a left to right priority list of the fonts that you'd like to see used for that particular area that you're selecting. For example, this first one is Baskerville, Palatino, Linotype, and so on. And that's telling the browser, first try this one if it's available, and if not, move on to the next one instead, and so on, until eventually, if all of those fonts are not found and are not available, then you default out to the serif font for that particular computer. And that'll be a basic one that will be available. So you'll at least get some kind of decorative font out of it, even if none of the ones you wanted were found. What we're going to need to do is build a similar kind of stack out of the fonts that we chose and intend to use. So let's begin by putting together some of those fonts we chose earlier for the body, which were Source Sans Pro and PT Sans Narrow. So I'm going to go to Manage Fonts. We need to go to Manage Fonts to build the font stacks. So here I'm going to go to Custom Font Stacks. Before we were here, we came through the Tools menu, but we were basically here picking the basic fonts that we wanted. Now we're going to Custom Font Stacks to build those lists or stacks of fonts that we want. So for the body, it's going to be Source Sans Pro as our first choice. And the order in which you choose these is important. So I'm going to go Source Sans Pro, and I'm going to use the little left-hand arrows there to choose that particular font as the first in my stack. Next, we want PT Sans Narrow. choose it and put it below Source Sans Pro, so it's the second in the list or stack. And now I'm done with the Adobe Edge web fonts for the body, but I still want to set up some default backups. And one of those is called Arial, and these are found mostly alphabetical here in this fairly large list. There's Arial. I'll add it in below the two Adobe Edge web fonts. And then lastly, I always want to end my font stacks with one of the basic serif, sans serif, mostly those two, but sometimes monospace or fantasy or cursive. In this case, what I'm trying to do is make sure that if all else fails, at least I get a sans serif font. So I'm going to choose that as the last one. So it's called a generic font family. It's not a specific font. It's just telling the browser, hey, if all else fails, at least give me a non-decorative font. So that's the end of my font list. You can see it being built right there. I'm going to click Done at this point. And what that allows me to do is to go back to that font family and now pick that font list or stack that I just built. There it is, Source Sans Pro, PT Sans Arial, Sans Serif. So I'm picking that. It goes right in, and immediately it goes onto the page. Where does it go? It actually goes everywhere because it's on the body. You may notice that in these areas it's actually kind of hard to see. It looks like it needs to be bolder. And so with that in mind, the font weight currently by default is at 200. And that's not dark enough to see well. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go down to 400 and just make that a little brighter. And I'm not really concerned about the headings brightness because we'll deal with those later. I'm more concerned with the main text here. And now that's much more readable and should work for us. So we've done our work on the body. Now inadvertently, in doing so, it made the headings look more plain, but we're going to override that with our own selectors on H1 and H2. So I'm going to click on the H1 now and use the tag selector to make sure that's selected. We don't have an H1 already built, so we're going to have to create a new one. So I'll click a plus sign on selectors. I get body H1. I don't need body in there, so I'm going to just hit the up arrow key and change that from body H1 to just H1. I'm going to hit enter to lock that in place. And I'm going to go up to font family now on that H1. And we're going to go to manage fonts again, and we're going to build a custom font stack using some of those fonts that we loaded earlier. So for the H1, it's Abril Font Face that I want as my first choice. So I've got that now. Secondly, Kata 1. Now, as a backup to those, just in case something's going on with the web fonts and they're not showing up, I'm going to have a backup, which is another serif font. This one's a pretty basic one called Georgia. Try to find that in this large list. There it is. Move that over. And then lastly, I will want, again, one of my generic families, serif in this case, because all of these other ones are also serif. So at least I can control that much, that it will be a decorative font. And we'll say done as our font stack has been built. We can now click on that font family one more time and we should see the list itself. There it is. Abril Font Face, Kata 1, Georgia, serif. You'll have a different list here than what I have. So with that chosen, we can see that our H1 has been put into place. And it looks very much like the original goal we saw earlier in the browser. By the way, I should mention that you only will see these fonts rendering in live view. If you are in design view, you will not see them until you go to the browser. Alright, now we have to do the same thing for our H2 headings, which are still looking like the sans serif in the body. So I'm going to click on any one of them, click on the H2 in the tag selector, And I could either begin a new selector here, or I could say, oh well, I already have an H2 selector defined. And when we click on it, you can see that it is selecting the right things for us, and we go directly to font family there. And of course, we're going to now go to Manage Fonts, Custom Font Stacks, and then in this case, for the H2, Kata 1 this time, instead of being a backup, is going to be the main first choice for H2s. And then the second choice for H2s will be Lancelot, as in Sir Lancelot. And then we will have a backup for it, which again is going to be Georgia. So scroll all the way up to the G's and choose Georgia as our third in the list. And then lastly, we'll do exactly what we did for the H1, which is to choose serif as our generic font family name if all else fails. Now we're done. You can see that the font stack has been built. Click Done. Back to font family one more time. Choose that one that we just built, which again is Kata 1, Lancelot, Georgia, Serif. And when we choose that, we should see our H2s take on that new look. At this point, we're ready to save. I'll do a save all. And then take a look in the browser just to make sure that things look as expected. And there it is. We can see the goal of having the readable, non-decorative body font, the main H1 heading, having a very bold and distinctive look, and then a more understated but clearly distinctive set of left-hand headings, or H2s. And if you compare that to the original goal we were looking at, you can see that things look pretty similar there. And the fonts are all in place. All right, so we have successfully built our web fonts using Adobe Edge web fonts. And when you are doing this live on a website, those particular fonts will be served to the user through a site called Typekit, which is Adobe's main server for these fonts. And hopefully they would all come through without any problems, and you have much more control now of how your website in general will look through the use of those Adobe web fonts. I should also say that there are other sources of fonts that you can use. Google and Font Squirrel are a couple others that are common, and there are many others as well. And you can download those yourself into your own website and serve them up that way as well. So there are other alternatives, but this is Adobe's solution, and since Dreamweaver is an Adobe product, we have some advantages built into Dreamweaver to use those. Alright, so that concludes our video exploration of the Adobe Edge web fonts in Dreamweaver CC 2017. Hope you found that helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.